So I guess just to begin, so I'm Jennifer Babcock.
And I'm Andrea Shaheen, and we work up in Law Career Services. And just to give you a little background, I was in your shoes quite some time ago. I graduated here in 2001. And Jennifer?
I'm an alumni also.
Yeah, so, okay, well, let's get started. Actually, Jennifer was just talking about faculty and staff who have had clerkships. Most famously, I don't know if you guys know Professor Jundeff. He was a clerk to Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. So he's a great resource and someone to talk to, and he has lots of great stories if you ever are lucky enough to take one of his classes. So what is a judicial clerkship? As the saying, there's a lot of people that claim that behind every great judge is his or her fantastic law clerk. You serve as a clerk, you serve as an assistant to a judge or a justice. You could be doing any number of things, researching, writing on legal matters. You will be helping the judge prep for their cases, trial, oral argument, whatever may be coming up on the judge's calendar, you would be doing all of it. You could be drafting proposed opinions. You will be consulting with the judge on the cases. It's a very one-on-one personal relationship with the judge in terms of all the cases that they work on. The benefits are pretty great for this type of position. A clerkship is a key credential for law practice in almost any practice area, and it's an incredible life experience. Not only do you develop strong and deep writing skills and research skills, but you also have exposure to all behind the scenes of a courtroom, judges' chambers, the interactions between all the attorneys in the community and the judge. And you also have exposure to the local bar, all of the attorneys, and it's great networking. While you're working for the judge, you're getting to meet all of these attorneys who at some point you could be working with or working for.
And they get to know your work pretty well, so there really is a whole host of people that are sort of vetting you, and
Exactly.
It's an amazing networking opportunity.
And you do have that opportunity to develop a good working relationship with your judge, and you could potentially gain a lifelong mentor from that judge. So, there's people who their judge stays friends with them for their entire career, their entire life. So, you make sure to do the best work for that judge, and that could definitely benefit you in the future. It's also very prestigious. It's a very prestigious thing to have a clerkship on your resume. That's the bottom line. When you're going to apply to work in a big firm after you've had a clerkship, it's as good, if not, stronger experience than a first-year associate. You're coming out beyond that of a first-year associate with that experience. These are considered highly competitive. So Jennifer was going to be talking about how you get your clerkship. So this is the first of a two-part series. The next program in this series is in March, because that's when you really start getting into the nitty-gritty of applying. There is a plan for law students to get federal clerkship positions, and the plan right now, I think it's opening up in September for the second years right now. So this is something for you guys to consider for the next hiring season. If you don't mind waiting a second, Jennifer will be back for her part of the presentation. Do you guys have any questions while we're waiting? I can try to answer any questions on it. Sure.
What are the kinds of judicial clerkships that 1Ls are able to achieve for that between 1 and 2L?
For the summer between your first and second year? It depends. There is actually, you could be in state court with the state court judges. The federal court judges have to stick to, they're supposed to stick to the plan. A lot of them don't, but they're supposed to. And Jennifer's going to explain that right now.
Let me just do a little intermission update. So that was Ms. Kirchner, and she apologizes. Her husband actually was hospitalized this morning, and that explains why.
Yikes.
She just didn't call and hasn't been here yet. So we're going to proceed without her, and after we're done with our presentation, we'll just start taking your questions. If someone from our office was able to track down an available faculty or staff member that was a previous clerk and they come in, we'll have them speak. But if not, we'll just end up cutting this short at whatever time you all feel like you've, asked whatever you need to, okay? So
I was just kind of talking about the plan. We had a question about what types of clerkships a first year, between the first and second year in the summer could get.
Oh, okay, between first and second year. Okay, so that's a little different than the nature of what we're talking about here. So let me back up, and I think one of the next things we're going to do is, describe a little bit about the nature of a clerkship. So generally when you hear judicial clerkship, what that means is it's a role for someone to assist, as Andrea had just described, a judge either at the federal or state level, both at the trial and appellate levels of both federal and state courts. Okay, and so generally people who do this role are attorneys, and oftentimes they are very recent grads. So there's kind of two ways to do it. You can be a recent graduate, and you can be a term judicial clerk. Okay, and that means while you're in school, you arrange for this to be what you plan to do once you're done with the bar exam. And many times you'll do that for a term of 1 year, and some judges will have you do it for a term of 2 years. Okay, that's one way to be a judicial clerk. Another way to be a judicial clerk in the way we're talking about today, which is different from when you're a student, is just as an attorney anytime in your career. At any point in your career, you can apply for and be hired to be what is called a career law clerk. Okay, and many times it's the same duties and the same job performances that, things that you're responsible for are the same across the two, but one is with respect to being a very recent grad, and one is called a career law clerk, which is not term-based. Okay? Many courts and judges will work with students as law students, whether it's the summertime or it's during a semester as for an externship, that kind of thing.
An externship, exactly. A judicial externship would be what you're asking about. Yeah.
Was that your question?
Sort of. I just didn't know what was available for us because it's like our second day. I'm just wondering what you're planning for.
Okay, so this might be helpful for us. So raise your hand if you're a 1L. Okay, and raise your hand if you're a 2L. Okay, and 3Ls? Okay. So the nature of this program is to have the opportunity to apply for this first category that I had mentioned, which is the term law clerk, okay? And even though that's for someone who's already an attorney, because it happens right after you take the bar exam, it's something you have to be prepping for well in advance, okay? And especially at the federal level, the application process is a little complex, and it involves this program called OSCAR, and as Andrea had just mentioned, the plan, which we'll describe. But because that's something you do as a student, and usually we target about the 2L year for that, okay? We also do 3Ls. Generally, as a 1L, you're really not eligible to apply for that yet, because it's part of the rules that you can't get in. You can't get into the system and research the judges and make applications. And by way of explanation for that, I think years ago, what happened was judges, especially federal judges, would look at law school student populations and start handpicking who they wanted to have work for them 3 years later, right? This is historically how judicial clerkships used to be filled. And so that was problematic because then, judges would, kind of line this up so well in advance. People who hadn't thought about doing it in advance didn't have an opportunity to get that kind of job. There's just a lot of complications with that. And so all the judges got together and formed this, what's really known as a loose agreement. And it's called the plan. It's the Federal Judicial Clerkship Hiring Plan. Okay, they call it the plan. And the rules that come with that program are, one, that you can't apply for a judicial clerkship, a term clerkship, which is the one that starts right after the bar exam for a recent graduate, until you have become a 2L. Okay? So for those of you that are 1Ls, it's actually really pertinent that you're here because the application process really is quite tricky and complicated, and it does take a lot of time and planning in advance. So it's really good to be thinking about it ahead of time. If you're a 2L or a 3L, and you're thinking about this is still the right time for you, okay? So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit, sheds a little light on this. So Andrea had mentioned that these positions, they're very prestigious, and you gain a lot of skills It's very good for your reputation, it's good for your networking, and it's also fascinating, it's very interesting. If you're somebody who has a big curiosity and a thirst for learning lots of different areas, and you're someone who wants to make an impact on a lot of different audiences, individuals, corporations, government agencies, this is a really fascinating type of work. But because of the level of prestige and interest in this, it is very competitive to do this. But it's not impossible. We have had students and graduates that have, students that have gone on as graduates to have these positions. In fact, Donna Kirchner, who will not be joining us, is she actually was a career law clerk for 13 years. Okay, so we also have Professor Marina Shea here, who, after we're done, will come down and we can talk with her and ask her questions about her experience as a judicial clerk. But getting back to the process and things you need to be thinking about, our office offers in the spring, and Andrea offered this program last spring, a very pragmatic, practical how to apply now that it's spring. And the reason for that timing is because this plan that I mentioned, it's a loose agreement among judges to not hire students for that position until after they've concluded their second year, okay? And they do that in early September, which is essentially right now. So in a few weeks, the judges will now all be looking at all of the now 3Ls to assess who they want to hire as graduates for that job. So that person that is now being considered in early September started the process back when they were in the spring semester of their 2L year, or even the fall semester, like some of the folks that are here. And it really takes a lot of planning on your part. Clearly, you have to have really good writing skills, okay, to qualify for this kind of position. And so that's something that, from the get-go, from day 2 as a 1L, like you, to start thinking about really perfecting your writing, thinking a lot about working closely with your law professors, maybe staying in touch with them after you're done with the actual law class to perfect your writing sample and make sure that your skills are competitive. The other key thing that you need to plan for as part of the application process is are strong recommendation letters, okay? Typically from faculty members, not always. Sometimes people will have someone who they reported to who was a supervisor that they worked for. But you definitely need to have some faculty members. Usually the recommendation or the requirement by the judges who hire is that you have 3 recommendation letters. And usually in that circumstance, you'd want at least 2 of them to be written by faculty members. And faculty members get asked all the time to write these letters. They're more likely to write one for you if you know them, right? And you know them well, and they know your work, and they like you, and you've kept in touch with them. So as a 1L or as a 2L, now is the time to start either making or solidifying those relationships with faculty members.
Definitely. Start cultivating them now.
Yeah, yeah. So those are some of the key things to be thinking about application-wise, application process-wise. And remember, in spring, we go through all of this with a fine-tooth comb. So for 2Ls, also in spring, that's the time to be really actively executing on this. Okay, let's see, I can describe the plan. One thing I didn't say is, well, I had mentioned that this loose agreement with the judges is really for the federal courts. But state court judges also have clerks. And their process for hiring clerks is very individual. It just depends on each judge and or each court. So you would have to look at each individual resource, whether it's their website or call their chambers and find out how they hire. Given how many different opportunities that you could have through that research project, it's a big undertaking to look into all this. It's another thing you want to kind of do in advance. And in fact, at this time in your life, especially if you're someone where you would actually be applying starting next spring and summer, so if you were a 2L or a 3L, I would spend a lot of time now doing this kind of research, so when it is time to apply, you've teed up all the things you need, you just need to put them in place, okay? So let's see, so as far as how to do that kind of research, there's a couple things that I think we're going to hand out that would be useful for you. The first one is, it's actually just two links on this flyer. One of them is our law school website, and that's the first one. And the reason that's there, of course you can find that on your own, but the reason that's there is because a lot of times students don't know, we actually have a ton of content and information on judicial clerkships on our website. Some of it is very practical stuff for you to print and use in terms of in spring when you start to make your applications and put them together. But a lot of it is just the collective wisdom of people we know in our law school community and otherwise with respect to the experiences that they've had as a clerk. Both their experience, you know, what they liked, what they didn't like, but also how they got the position. Thank you. How they got the position in the first place, advice that they may have. So it's really, it's actually pretty deep content on this. So I would spend some time looking at that. The second URL on this blue sheet is the Oscar website itself. Okay? And the value of that is being able to research the individual judges and see what they want to hire. The problem is if you're not a 2L, you can't view this, okay? Because again, they've agreed to not start the process with 1Ls. I mean, the idea really is to let 1Ls be 1Ls and then start worrying about, you know, the process involved in your future positions, postgraduate positions. So if you're not in that category, you can go on to Oscar, you can set up an account, you have to put in your graduation date, which is how they know you're a 1L or a 2L, right? And then you can go through the website and start to look at each individual judge's profile. Some of the judges say very little. Some of them will only hire from Harvard. You know, some say quite a bit. Some are funny, some are very brief. You know, they're all very different. So it takes a little bit of time to look through that. The process of researching these judges, we really recommend that you maybe, you know, start a spreadsheet and keep track of who these folks are. And the idea behind this research is because the more judges that you apply to, the more likely you are to get a position. And so this is where we want to really recommend to you to keep yourself very open. So for example, really consider geography, because obviously the more geographical locations you're willing to live, you know, where judges are hiring, the more opportunities you have, you know, to be considered for a position. There's also specialty courts, like the tax court, bankruptcy court, administrative law judges. There's a lot of different opportunities, especially at the state court level. There's a lot of different opportunities that people sometimes are thinking about the federal system, and this Oscar program we talk a lot about because it's tricky, but really there's even more opportunities than that.
We have this for you to islands, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We have, and I don't know if the judge is an alumni of Santa Clara, but the North Mariana Islands, there's a justice there that loves hiring from Santa Clara. Almost every year we have one or maybe even two.
There's two from the class of 2011 that are down there. So
What a fantastic experience. You know, you get to do all the things that Andre was just describing, and you're, you know, this interesting tropical, you know, gorgeous area. So if you're open to that, you know, that's something to think about. And before we move on to talking with Professor Shea about what her time as a clerk was like, I just want to mention also that this green flyer we handed out it's another piece of collective wisdom. It's a list of resources, mostly web-based, where you can find a lot of both official and formal information about clerkships, but also very kind of grassrootsy, bloggy type information from people who actually were clerks, and even recently talking about different judges, who they liked, who they applied to, how the interviews went. A lot of really interesting content. So this is another kind of piece of the research project for you. So before we have Professor Shea come down, are there any questions so far? Because we just blew through a whole bunch of really logistical types of things, and I know that that's because we save it to spring, but it may be new to you, and you may want to ask a bit about it now. No? Okay. Great. Well, then I guess we've achieved clarity. So, Professor Shea, thank you for joining us last minute.
So just stop here, interrupt me or time here.
Just, yes, I know you're good at this. Yeah, just start off by telling us you coach forward.
Yeah, okay. Well, hello everyone. I'm so glad to see you here and know that you're interested in clerking. I'm Marina Shea, a senior fellow here, and I clerked the year after I graduated from law school in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania in a federal district court for a judge named Lewis Pollack, and I did that for 1 year with one other co-clerk. And then the year after that, I clerked for Justice John Paul Stevens on the Supreme Court. And so that I had a district court trial level federal experience and an appellate federal court experience, which is kind of a nice package. The only way to really add it up even more than that, a friend of mine, actually another Stevens clerk, clerked for a Northern District of California judge, and then for Stephen Breyer when he was on the appellate court in the First Circuit, and then for Justice Stevens, and then not being able to get quite enough in, she went and clerked for, I think it might have been the Mariana Islands, but it was some foreign court somewhere for another year, and then having gotten her sort of maturity appearance, she went off and taught and never practiced a day of law. There are some people who make a career out of clerking, as you heard, actually, there are career clerkships. And so I'm delighted to talk about this experience. By really bar none. I mean, I love my job here. I've loved the jobs that I've had. Clerking, both years, those are the 2 best years of my work life, and I suspect will always be so. Not that it's all downhill from there, but truly, I cannot say enough wonderful things about the opportunity to have gotten to clerk and how useful it is. A couple of comments on maybe why you do this. You heard about the resume value, and I think that that's true, right? I mean, a whole bunch of you just raised your eyebrows and thought, oh, I didn't know she clerked on this before. And now all of a sudden you think I have a little star on my head and I'm a different person, and I'm not, right? But it's really great to like be able to whip it out, right? It's good for your resume, and there's a reason why it's good for your resume. It really actually means a lot of things behind it, and so employers and colleagues will in fact use that as shorthand for the assumption that you have in fact been exposed to a series of experiences that likely in fact will be true, and it will make you a better lawyer and member of the judicial system. A couple of ways why. I want to talk a little bit about your mindset and what you learn, and about mentoring and the relationships that it builds. There are so many benefits. In terms of the mindset, I think, and I went to law school because I wanted to change the world, and I had a lot of opinions about things, and I eventually did in fact practice in a public interest advocacy practice. But I spent 2 years before that working for judges. And that was wonderful, because even though there's a lot of talk about judges having different political opinions and so on, judges, their job is to be the fair and neutral decision maker in our justice system. That is their goal. It's not for one party or their client to get the best advantage possible. And so when you spend your time in the formative years, in my mind, right after law school, trying to come up with the best right decision, not the decision that's best for your client who's paying you money, but the best decision for the justice system based on precedent, based on what the system can tolerate, based on the parties and the interests involved. It helps give you a kind of grounding in a neutrality of sort of excellence. And it doesn't matter if you're working for a judge appointed by this president or that president, it still is. You're really trying to figure out the best answer. And I think that's a wonderful position to start from, because it doesn't skew you in one direction or another. You're not a prosecutor or a defense person. You're not, on the plaintiff's side or the defendant's side. So I think that neutral positioning and watching really smart, thoughtful jurists think through the problems, and to notice how they don't just sort of snap off a political response. I mean, sometimes we're cynical about it, and sometimes their decisions have patterns based on philosophies or other decision making, but you get to see it up close and understand how to problem solve. So you are right beside the judge being that problem solver. When I asked Justice Stevens in the interview, what did he most need out of a law clerk, right? What made a good law clerk? He said, a law clerk is my lawyer. He said, at the end of the day, I have to sign my name to the opinions, but I have to do a really good job at that, and it takes a lot of work. And so you're my lawyer. You're going to help me look up law. You're going to help advise me. You're going to sometimes help me draft things. Right? But at the end of the day, it's my work product. It's my name on the line, just like it'll be your client's name on the line. But you're going to do the best, most excellent legal work you can in that context. And he used us for that, and so you really get to do the problem solving. And what does that mean? That means you take problems that come through the door, the cases, whether they're trial level or appellate level, you research them. That means that you will become a research maven. You will try to learn about things that you've never heard of before and need to, because you're going to be helping make decisions in real life contexts where millions and zillions of dollars or people's lives literally are on the line. And so there's nothing like snapping you out of that kind of sense of, gee, how do I triage this life, my life, what am I going to get done by Thursday for class, into, really in the next 48 hours they're going to decide on this stay or not, and if there isn't a stay, the person will be executed by midnight tonight. So think about it, because it kind of matters, right? So you're doing that kind of applied work, and it's just really, I think, a tremendous opportunity to help problem solve in a practical world, in a system that's imperfect, where not all the evidence is in front of you, but too bad, a decision has to be made now. And so there's a kind of aliveness to it. I'm a real fan of Malcolm Gladwell. If any of you have read his books, Outliers is among them, and in that he regurgitates some of the social science literature on the so-called 10,000 hours of experience. There's an argument that it takes 10,000 hours to get good at anything. You know, think about it. If you're going to become a violinist, if you're going to become, as it turns out, a good lawyer, if you're going to be an Olympic diver, it takes 10,000 hours of practice. Clerking is one way of smashing a zillion of those hours. 30 of them into every day. And it really is amazing. You can just shovel through it. I mean, if you've already been on law review and you've had to do citation packets until your brain goes numb, you know, it's like, why am I doing this? I'm not making that much per hour for this. It turns out you just have to do it over and over and over again to get good at it. And so practicing law is exactly that, a practice. And whether you do it in a law office or whether you do it out in your first job as some kind of fellow, you know, for law or whatever, or whether you do it as a clerk, you're going to want a steady stream of work to help make your skills get grounded and become excellent at it. So when I was doing cert petitions, when I was working on the Supreme Court, everyone thinks, oh, did you help write opinions? Yeah, sure. We had an exchange of opinions. We listened to oral argument, right? But every single week, in addition to the drafting assignments and the oral argument schedule, there were literally hundreds of petitions for review that would come into the Supreme Court. And Justice Stevens was not a member of the so-called cert pool, where all the clerks divided all of the cases up. So in Justice Stevens' chambers, we took those 100 petitions that came in every week and divided them among the three of us. So every week, I had 25 to 50 petitions, the cert petition, the response, the reply to the response, to read through, and then I got to use my discretion to pick the 10 or so that were close in terms of deciding to hear review. And I got to write a 2 to 5 page memo to the justice about whether or not he should vote to hear that case. And that happened at conference every week. So that's just the background work, right? That's the stuff that happens all of the time, not the opinions that you're working on that week. So I got faster at reading lots of petitions. And I learned to dictate, literally. I dictated my memos. I used an old-fashioned dictaphone. Now I use my telephone. So 10,000 hours. I know it sounds like a lot, but you know, there's never a better time to do it because you're not signing the papers, right? This is the best way to get 10,000 hours. It's like going to law school. It's practice. Someone else ultimately is on the line. All right. So you're learning how to be a lawyer, right? You are also seeing lawyers. And I will say here, the trial court experience was unbelievable because you pick up the phone and some lawyer is ragging on you about something and you're thinking, that is unprofessional. You were thinking, I am not going to actually pull this petition to the top of my pile now because I don't like you. But you're also thinking, I need to never be that way when I'm a lawyer because I will be shut out. You will see lawyers who are good, and you will see lawyers who are smart but awful, and you will see lawyers who are dumb and awful. And you will learn which ways to be and which ways not to be, because it really matters. And it's nothing like seeing it through the eyes of the neutral decision maker and the judge again, to look at that kind of behavior. Because when you're in a world of lawyers, and let's say you get that big firm job and you go off and everyone around you is just like exuding testosterone, you know? So you go into chambers and, you know, you've got this argument that you need a motion and you're going to argue it and you're just full of testosterone and your partners are saying, yeah, yeah, and you know, and you have no idea what kind of effect that is having on your decision maker. It's just disgusting. So what you want to do is learn how you behave in the overall world of being an advocate. And you see a lot of lawyers in a lot of settings. All right, so that's the learning piece. You just learn tons of stuff. I mean, God, there's just the weirdest things I know from random opinions, but fine. It's a little bit of a mishmash. It's kind of a little bit of everything. Or maybe you could like be specialized and do bankruptcy court or do tax court. You'll learn a ton of stuff. It doesn't matter if you're never going to go back to the state of South Carolina again and you happen to learn that law. You are learning so much more about law in general, how it's found, how it's processed, how to deal with it, how to research it, how to write about it. It doesn't matter. You know, you can pick any jurisdiction. It's still worth doing. You'll still get the skills. Second major point, mentoring. Chambers are tiny places. There's a judge. There's usually an administrative assistant, 1 to max 4 clerks, typically 2. Maybe a clerk, a deputy clerk that helps deal with the scheduling issues. And that's probably it. It's a family. It's a very, very tight family. And you're going to do that job for a year or maybe 2 years if you're lucky, and that's it. So you've got to learn how to behave in this very tight pod. The other thing is judges are not allowed to go out and get frisky and have a lot of fun talking to all their friends about their work all the time, right? Because they're judges and it's all confidential. And they have so many restrictions on their First Amendment rights, right? That they can't talk about their work with a lot of people, except their clerks. So now all of a sudden you are the best professional friend of a pretty smart person who's thought about this a lot. And you are their colleague. You are sitting there every day working through hard problems, talking about different angles, expressing doubt, exploring new ways to think through a problem. There is nothing like watching a very, very experienced, sharp, thoughtful judge figure out a hard problem. It's really like watching, it's like watching the Olympics. It's poetry. It is amazing virtuosity. And to see how that happens gives you the opportunity to learn how to take those thought patterns yourself, to understand where there's ambiguity and difficulty. So when you become an advocate, you can think about how to frame problems, what their problem is. What does the decider have to work through to get there? How do you help them get there easily? How can you make them decide what to do? The other piece of mentoring, besides that you're working like this, closely with the judge, is just the individual relationship you get with the judge. As I said, Justice Stevens said, I need a lawyer. And he had a very professional relationship with his clerks, once or twice, during the year he would invite you over to the house, and, you could see that they were normal people who, probably put on their pants, one leg at a time. But I got lucky, and sometimes people do. Different people have different relationships with their judges. I got extremely lucky. My first judge, Lou Pollack, who just passed away in May, I have to say. Yes, I know it's a terrible loss for the entire universe. But Lou became my father, and Lou's wife became my mother. I really can't state it in any more, modest terms. My parents are lovely people in many ways, but have no earthly idea what I do professionally, and let go of me pretty much from when I went to college because they couldn't help me navigate anything other than saying, we have faith, go ahead, right? And so it wasn't really until I got out of law school and found Lou that I had sort of a professional mentor. But for me, profession wasn't just how do I execute law, it was what do I want to do with my life? How do you apply your interest in justice? What's worth doing? Lou guided me toward completely away from my original thought pattern of what I wanted to do with my law degree, and was why I wound up working for Legal Defense Fund when I got out of my second clerkship, and when I was making the decision to go back from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I was looking at public interest law firms. I was also sort of thinking about teaching, and Lou had been the dean at Yale and at Penn before he was on the federal bench, and he sort of had a lot of academic interests, and was sort of like, well, we want to talk about that. And there was just a lot of gentle guidance. Even now that he's dead, it's amazing how there's been just this resurgence on the Clerks Network list of talking to each other about all of the ways in which Lou has changed their lives. We are actually having discussion groups with each other. So there's another piece of this, which is you get the mentoring of the peers of all of the judges' previous clerks. And there are clerk reunions. All judges have them. You have a network of other clerks around you that are stunning. I mean, my co-clerk in district court is now teaching on the University of Texas faculty, and is in the ALI and doing the draft on the death penalty policy. Another clerk is a big partner in a big firm in New York. I still call him every once in a while to get a site for something, because we used to call him the Lexus lineman. He had this photographic memory. There was a case. It was about 5 years ago, maybe 10. I don't know. It's this, and it's like 386. That's something. It's amazing. My other co-clerk is now the provost at Princeton. He's got out of teaching. It's an amazing network of people, and that is also just unbelievable for your professional opportunities, for your ability to see the world in a bigger way than just the job that's in front of you. So I've talked too long already, I'm sure. So I think I will stop there and say, what else? One small comment, because I know this is the big hurdle. It's worth taking the pay cut and the living in wherever bills. It's only a year or two. And frankly, you will never likely have as much freedom to go somewhere crazy, to do something without a lot of money, as you will have right after you're out of law school. Because the enormity of your debt, while it's pressing upon you, will not yet be at a screaming fever pitch. You will not probably have a mortgage to have to feed. You will be more mobile than you've ever been before. And how many of you have not ever lived outside of the state of California for longer than a summer? Okay, oh, good for you guys. Okay, so you've been around a little bit. You have got to get yourself out of this coddled West Coast, sunny, happy existence. No, I'll show you my bias. I can do that. But seriously, go live somewhere else, even if it's just for a year. It's amazing how much it'll bust open your perspective, right? My friend from New York who went and did a clerkship in Shreveport, Louisiana on the 5th Circuit. Oh, wow, all those things they say about the South really are true, right? You see history in a totally different way. Go live somewhere crazy for a year. Do it. It's the greatest excuse. You won't have to explain it to employers later. Gosh, why did you go live in Kansas, huh? Couldn't get a job, huh? Went back home? No, you had a clerkship, for heaven's sakes, and it was great, right? So take the opportunity, take the excuse. No one will question this. This is one of the few jobs that you do not ever have to justify, right? Periods of your life. Go live somewhere crazy, get a good experience out of it. It is, I think, the easiest application process out of everything. Out of all the jobs I've ever tried to get, or whatever. All the work for a judicial clerkship, frankly, you're doing right now. You're doing it in law school. And then it's really just a question of getting your application in front of people. The legwork to actually apply. A judicial, I think a clerkship is less like a regular, work with a bunch of other lawyers kind of job. Judges tend to be old-fashioned about looking at things, about interviewing for real. So I think that if you know what it is that the job is, you can go in and just be totally honest and present very well. It's a completely individualized decision. So your record matters only as far as it takes to get through the door. Once you're through the door for the interview, it's all about, are you going to be the person that I want to live with in my home, my chambers, along with 3 or 4 other people to be my family? And that is the conversation. You pick them, they pick you. It's like a really long date. So you've got to make it. And so in that way, it's very easy, I think, job application. All right, questions? Or whatever. Yeah.
A lot of tools are doing OCIs and callbacks right now, and if they were to get a job next summer, hoping in the long run for an offer from that firm, how does it work when you possibly, hallelujah, you get an offer from a firm, but you want to do a judicial clerkship? Do most firms accept that that's important to you?
Absolutely. It is to a firm's benefit to have lawyers with clerkships on their resume. It is to their benefit because they know you're going to be you've gotten a year of better experience than they could have given you themselves. It's good because it shows well. If it happens to be in a type of court, federal or state or regional or whatever, they know they might actually have direct, immediate advantages from you having been clerking on right there for so-and-so. Well, we have a case in front of so-and-so. I know you can't work on it, but, you know. And so they love it. In fact, I heard that you can get a letter of recommendation from, for example, an employer. That's fine if they work with you really closely and can talk about that work, but it's not ever perceived as being neutral as a judge looks at it, because every judge knows that it is in firm, blah-diddy and blah-diddy's interest for you to get this clerkship. And they'll say anything to try to help you get that clerkship because it's in their interest. And they will wait. I do not know of any firm really. I mean, maybe in this economy it's a little wacky that would say, we can't hold it for you. But I think in this economy, firms are dying to hold and defer people, right, from their jobs.
And typically, not only do they wait, they let you, so let's say you term clerk for 1 year, they let you wait, and then you can come in as a second-year associate. They don't presume that you're now starting out as a first-year associate. You're with your class. And many times, they will give you a bonus.
Yeah, they'll lock them. Oh yeah, so the signing bonus, if I had gone to, at the time, the largest law firm in the country, because it was when they just had started Pac-Manning and eating each other, was Jones Day. And the signing bonus, if I had gone to Jones Day with the Supreme Court clerkship, was at the time, and this is 1990, I think it was like $40,000 just to sign, which was twice my salary at the public interest firm that I decided to go to. And so for a while I was actually playing around with this. I was like, why don't you guys take the $40,000, I'll take the $40,000, I'll get it, pay the taxes, and then I'll give the public interest firm all the rest of the money, and you can hire somebody into my job just for a year, though. They can only have it for a year, and then I'm coming. Right? We thought about that, but decided, and that was only if they couldn't actually create a job for me at the Inc. firm, but they wound up coming up with one, and so we didn't do that.
So some of that has changed with the given economy now, but not a lot, and they definitely, it's still very prestigious for them, and they definitely will wait for you.
No one seemed to offer me money for the district court election, for what it's worth. But it was, by far, and I got to tell you, it was the best experience. I mean, just truly. But maybe that's just because Lou is, my motto now is, what would Lou do? I'm serious. And now that, it's tragic that it takes a death to actually really revive all of this. But I actually think about that almost every day. Like when faced with something, what would Lou do? Just amazing. If I could come up with the correct answer to that a third of the time, I would be so much better of a person in so many ways. And that's something I get to keep for the rest of my life. It's a total gift. Yeah.
So I'm coming from a little different perspective as a 3L. Is it looked at differently if I have like 2 faculty letters and then a letter of recommendation from my supervisor at a federal agency?
No, I think that would be good, actually. If you have real work experience, they can write about the kinds of things that in a workplace matter, work ethic, your ability to think through stuff on your own, and stuff that, faculty members don't see all of that. So you absolutely want that, and the more that you can get good, concrete detail, with sometimes examples, that can really sort of have the judge be able to imagine. I mean, think about what this job is. The judge needs to get someone who's smart enough, and almost every application is, right, who can do the research and write the work. Okay, that's all a given, let's say. Your resume, the cut to get you through the door means you wouldn't have performed at a level that you couldn't do that. So then it's all about, can you actually think your way out of a paper bag? Can you organize yourself? Can you dress appropriately? Are you fun to work with? Can you communicate well and work through, so on. And so your employer will know that much better.
I actually externed with a federal judge recently, and I was wondering, when it goes from being an extern to clerk, are the duties that much different? I'm assuming it is, but is it also like something that you can build upon?
Yes and yes, usually. It depends a lot on how a particular judge uses externs, whether or not it's the same or not. Sometimes they hide them off and just sort of give them baby versions of what clerks do. You just would do one case instead of, let's say, 20. Sometimes externs do only certain types of work that are available in the chambers. So that's a question that you would need to ask of any given judge. And frankly, not every judge gives all their clerks the same duties. Justice Stevens famously does his own first drafts, and a lot of justices don't, and that's just a difference. Judge Pollack used to sit regularly on the appellate courts by designation. So in the middle of all of this, we'd go off into a Third Circuit or a Ninth Circuit sitting, which was a totally different rhythm to do an appellate brief planning kind of oral argument preparation instead of trials and motions. So it just completely depends. You know, some judges don't do criminal work or on some sort of different rotation, so their work is actually potentially different. If we haven't mentioned, I don't know, magistrate judges in the federal system, they're non-Article III, non-confirmed by the Senate judges that often are designated to do 95% of what an Article III judge can do. And so depending on the federal district, you can get a magistrate judge as the person you work for and essentially get the full district court clerkship experience. But a lot of people either don't know or are aiming, you know, sort of for the more, you know, obvious judges. So that's a great way to sneak in and get what any good employer will appreciate as being an equivalent experience. Thinking about it? On the edge, why not? Why not go for it? Just, I'm curious. I'm busy, just didn't have time to get off that next set of resumes. Oh well. Road not taken. What else?
Maybe more rooted in the area, you have, you know.
I'm rooted in the area. How could I possibly leave Northern
Yeah.
California? Let me just tell you that every other miserable human being graduating from law school who isn't in Northern California, except for the delusional Southern California ones who want to stay there, everybody wants to come here. So let me just tell you, all those freezing, mean New York people, all of those Boston snobby people, all of those Washington people who want to get out of the Beltway and away from the humidity for a little bit, want to come spend their fun year in San Francisco. Because it's the Bay Area. So let me just tell you, this is one of the probably 3 most competitive markets for a clerkship in the country, in Northern California. So if you insist on being able to keep your current address, your odds of getting a clerkship have been, I don't know, divided by, 1,000 Harvard and Yale graduates. How's that? So let me just suggest that you consider branching out a little bit, you know. Reno ain't so far from Tahoe, not a bad thing. You know, I know people who've done amazingly prestigious, you know, later careers, having clerked in Dallas or having, you know, gone to, I mean, you know, the clerkship I didn't take that I really, really, really wanted to take in so many fun ways was in Tyler, Texas. Judge Justice was his name, actually. William Wayne Justice. It's kind of like, you know, Major from Catch-22. He famously, he took over the Texas prison system and reformed it, and got rocks thrown through his windows at home and at chambers on a regular basis. But he was from Texas, and I grew up in Waco, Texas, and you know, you figure, what good is that? Nothing, until you can say, hey, I came from a small crummy town in Texas too, and so Tyler isn't going to be such a big leap. And I know already what my allergies are there. And that's great, come on down. You know, you get it, and I wish I could have done more. All right, yeah.
We're just 1L, so this doesn't apply to us. But if you had any tips for 1Ls about how to prepare yourself in the next year or 2 as far as classes that are maybe more relevant or less relevant, what can I do now to plan my steps next year to make this all happen?
They're the same steps that you would take to be a good lawyer. So I would suggest, number 1, everyone should take administrative law. We do not require it, but you should either take administrative law or you should take a class that is essentially based in administrative law. So a lot of, for example, environmental law is essentially administrative proceedings, or employment discrimination gives you a lot of EEOC kind of stuff. So you want to be familiar with administrative law. If you want to be a litigator in federal or state court, you will probably want to take federal courts, or sometimes it's called federal jurisdiction. I think we call it federal courts here. With federal courts is kind of like con law and civil procedure meet each other and go wild at the top. Kind of like the way math and philosophy merge at a certain weird level. That's what federal courts is, and it's really actually fundamentally useful for the federal jurisdiction. Otherwise, I would say you want to write a lot. and write well. And that might be a law review experience, it might be a big court experience, but you know, something that keeps you writing regularly. I mean, you really, by the way, I don't like to write. I still don't like to write. It's a problem. But the more you do it at a certain level, I mean, when I tell you guys in various academic sessions to just, you know, write until you puke, so that way if your brain shuts down in the middle of an exam, your fingers still know how to say something. Really, you want to kind of just get that way as a lawyer. It's just the currency, and so the more you can write, and if you don't like it, start learning to suck it down, even if you don't like it. It's really just the practice, and all of that's for practice as well. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Sure, and I'm happy to talk to anyone. You know.